On April 9, 1940, Germany simultaneously invaded Norway and occupied Denmark, and the war began in earnest. On May 10th, German forces swept through Belgium and the Netherlands in what became known as the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. 3 days later, Hitler's troops crossed the Meuse River and struck French forces at Sedan, located at the northern end of the Maginot Line, an elaborate chain of fortifications constructed after World War I and considered impenetrable defensive barrier. In fact, the Germans broke through the line with their tanks and planes and continued to the rear, rendering it useless. The British Expeditionary Force, or BEF for short, was evacuated by sea from Dunkirk in late May, while in the south, French forces mounted a doomed resistance. With France on the verge of collapse, Italy's fascist dictator Benito Mussolini formed an alliance with Hitler, the Pact of Steel, and Italy declared war against France and Britain on June 10th. On June 14th, German forces entered Paris. A new government formed by Marshal Philippe Pétain, France's hero of World War I, requested an armistice 2 nights later. France was subsequently divided into 2 zones, one under German military occupation and the other under Pétain's government, installed at Vichy, France. Hitler now turned his attention to Britain, which had the defensive advantage of being separated from the continent by the English Channel. To pave the way for an amphibious invasion dubbed Operation Sea Lion, German planes bombed Britain extensively beginning in September 1940 until May 1941, known as the Blitz, including night raids on London and other industrial centers that caused heavy civilian casualties and damage. The Royal Air Force, or the RAF, eventually defeated the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, in the Battle of Britain, and Hitler postponed his plans to invade. With Britain's defensive resources pushed to the limit, Prime Minister Winston Churchill began receiving crucial aid from the US under the Lend-Lease Act passed by Congress in early 1941. By early 1941, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria joined the Axis, and German troops overran Yugoslavia and Greece that April. Hitler's conquest of the Balkans was a precursor for his real objective, an invasion of the Soviet Union, whose vast territory would give the German master race what it needed. The other half of Hitler's strategy was the extermination of the Jews from throughout the German-occupied Europe. Plans for the so-called final solution were introduced around the time of the Soviet offensive, and over the next 3 years, more than 4 million Jews would perish in the death camps established in occupied Poland. On June 22, 1941, Hitler ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. Though Soviet tanks and aircraft greatly outnumbered the Germans, Russian aviation technology was largely obsolete, and the impact of the surprise invasion helped Germans get within 200 miles of Moscow by mid-July. Arguments between Hitler and his commanders delayed the next German advance until October, when it was stalled by a Soviet counteroffensive on the onset of the harsh winter weather. With Britain facing Germany in Europe, the United States was the only nation capable of combating the Japanese aggression, which by late 1941 included an expansion of its ongoing war with China and the seizure of European colonial holdings in the Far East. On December 7, 1941, 360 Japanese aircraft attacked the major U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, taking the Americans completely by surprise and claiming the lives of more than 2,300 troops. The attack on Pearl Harbor served to unify the American public opinion in favor of entering World War II. And on December 8th, Congress declared war on Japan with only one dissenting vote. Germany and the other Axis powers promptly declared war on the United States. After a string of Japanese victories, the U.S. Pacific Fleet won the Battle of Midway in June 1942, which proved to be the turning point in the war. On Guadalcanal, one of the southern Solomon Islands, the Allies also had success against Japanese forces in a series of battles from August 1942 to February 1943, helping turn the tide further in the Pacific. In mid-1943, Allied naval forces began an aggressive counterattack against the Japanese, involving a series of amphibious assaults on key Japanese-held islands in the Pacific. This so-called island hopping strategy proved successful, and the Allied forces moved closer to their ultimate goal of invading the mainland of Japan. In North Africa, British and American forces had defeated the Italians and Germans by 1943. An Allied invasion of Sicily and Italy followed, and Mussolini's government fell in July 1943, though Allied fighting against the Germans in Italy would continue until 1945. On the Eastern Front, a Soviet counteroffensive launched in November 1942 ended the bloody Battle of Stalingrad, which had seen some of the fiercest combat of World War II. The approach of winter, along with the dwindling food and medical supplies, spelled the end for the Germans there, and the last of them surrendered on January 31st, 1943. It was the beginning of the end for the Axis powers. Germany now facing a war in the east and now in the west, codenamed Operation Overlord, an all-out amphibious invasion of mainland France. The stage had been set for the downfall of Nazi Germany. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more historical content. We'll see you in the next one.